Hi, I'm Catherine Miller, and I am presenting my permaculture design project and my social systems design project today. It's called The Evolution of Wayward Farm. And the reason I'm calling it The Evolution of Wayward Farm is because I started this study of permaculture in January 2020. And since then, I've gone through many iterations, tweaking the design, tweaking the implementation of the design. And even though I've started to see systems stabilizing along the way, I don't see any end to this evolutionary process. I grown up observing and being amongst living and growing things. They're the things that have helped me keep me stable and sane over many years. And so I feel I have a commitment to supporting those systems in the world around me. And I see that there's a lot of restoration needed. I've studied and taught yoga, meditation, breath work, plant-based culinary arts, women's conscious leadership. I'm currently coaching women who are going through perimenopause and menopause. So I'm very interested in a holistic perspective and the connections between all these living systems. Because I got kind of burnt out in 2020, just working on the computer all the time, I decided to downsize my business basically. And so I could spend more time outside, and decided to go into the study of permaculture at that point. I have a very happy balance now between all those things, which I feel very grateful for. My design thesis and vision statement is based on my experience growing up on a dirt road out in the middle of nowhere, where I was surrounded by a cacophony of insects and birds and amphibians, especially in spring and summer. And I don't see that so much anymore. I see that there's been more and more encroachment in the natural world on these natural systems. And I feel that's a loss for all of us. So our mission here at Wayward Farm is just to be an example of how human beings can partner with plants to create an oasis of ecological healing and habitat. Even in the midst of a tiny town on a tiny plot of land surrounded by pavement, our mission is to create a learning teaching garden where we can bring other people who can be inspired to go and practice this way of being in the world themselves. I really want people to be able to appreciate urban landscapes in a new light, for their potential to bring nature home, as Doug Tallamy says. I used primary permaculture principles to help me zero in on my goals and make them very practical and measurable. Increasing diversity is with a focus on introducing keystone species, adding habitat, inviting the community in, increasing yield through planting perennials and replacing those non-productive trees that are already here with perennials that will not only produce for people, but also for pollinators. Introducing things like chickens, which I never thought I would do, which has been a really wonderful experience. And then really learning how to cycle and recycle, especially water, which is a resource that is not really have to design around here. And even though we get a lot of rain, the soil is very sandy. So that's been another issue that we've been working hard on. I love this, being able to go from the big to the little. It's added a new perspective. So instead of me just working within my perceived boundaries on this little piece of land, really backing up and looking at the larger context of the geology and the history around me has given me a different lens to look through. This blue bubble here, that's about where we are in this Housatonic watershed. The watershed is got many subsheds. It goes all the way to Long Island Sound, and it's quite an amazing system in and of itself. If you look in a little bit closer at the topography right around Lee, you can see we have some little lakes and reservoirs and a lot of very old, worn down mountains, beautifully forested. The truth is, most of these forests have been cut down at least a couple of times since the town was founded in 1777. The Indians, the Mohicans that used to live here were forced to move to Wisconsin. The river has a long history of being polluted through paper mills and tanneries and things like that. So it's the environment itself, although beautiful on the surface, you can see that the human impact on it has been quite extensive. You can see the Housatonic River going through the town here. This is our purple X here is where we're located. It's a little bit easier to see more clearly where the streets are and stuff. The river was polluted by GE decades ago, and the town is still in the midst of a battle between residents, really. There's a cleanup that's planned, but a lot of residents are against it. A lot of them are for it. And so there's a bit of a battle still going on around that. But it looks like there is going to be about 10 years spent trying to mitigate the damage that's been done to the river. This is our lot. It's a very typical lot. It's just a block away from Main Street. You can see that, we have about a third maybe or so of the land is taken up by the house and the driveway. Luckily for us, we have a lot of porches, which are like these nice intermediate spaces between inside and outside. We also are right next to a major road and a sidewalk where we get a lot of passersby. This is our house when we first moved in 2010. This is a 170-year-old farmhouse. You can see that just had a normal, typical lawn all around it with a lot of yew hedges. This has become a passion project for us. How do we create a space where we can live and work and invite other people into and be an inspiration to others? Because we're surrounded by the state park, October Mountain State Park, and lakes and hills and all of that, we still tend to get a lot of wildlife right in the middle of the town. So we get possums, skunks, coy dogs, foxes, and bears. Not too often, but often enough. This is what our house looked like in 2018. Basically, I've just been compelled. I did so much work on computer that I just felt like being outside, being in the dirt was one of my main ways of supporting myself. And so when anyone gave away any plants, I would take them and try to find the best spot for them. And I didn't really have a design. I didn't think in terms of systems. I just thought in terms of grow, 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 grow. So not all the plants you see here are natives actually, but I got into that a little bit more later. This is the south side of the house, and you can see there are a lot of pollinator plants here. So these are the zones. When I first started the permaculture course, zone 0 is my happy spot. And this is where I did a lot of my studying and made the decision to, downsize my business, basically. You can see there's a lot of interaction with neighbors and things and with people walking by, which sometimes used to bother me, but which I've seen as come to see as an asset. These are the areas around town where we'll take our dog for a walk and visit restaurants and post office. One big advantage of being in the town is that we aren't isolated and that we have access to both the wild areas and the services that we need on a weekly basis. This was one of my favorite maps, the sector map, because I feel like we have a real advantage in the location that we're at that I never would have realized if I hadn't done this work. So because of the location of the house on the map, we have a lot of different microclimates. We have a bit of land on every side of us that gets different amounts of sunlight, different amounts of wind, and different amounts of water. We also have a slope, which works very well in terms of moving water to the parts of the property that need it most. We have different areas of trees and things that create shade, especially along the west and north edges here. And we get a really nice amount of sun along this sloped area here on the south side of the house. Let me think. I think that's about it. We do get a lot of noise from traffic. This is a road that people use to avoid Main Street, and we get a lot of that daily foot traffic. And but mostly I feel like this just offers us a lot of opportunity for diversity and for yields that I'm very grateful for. The water systems are something that I neglected and didn't really think about at all when I was making changes to the property. It was really an afterthought. So as a result, I'm having to backtrack a little bit. Luckily, we have downspouts at different areas of the house, a lot of different slopes, roof sloping in a lot of different directions. And we also have 2 areas where we can hook up a hose and use town water. We do, in spite of the pollution of the Housatonic River, we do have reservoirs higher up in the hills where the town gets its water. So our water is pretty good quality compared to some other places. So we're lucky in that way. And we do get about 48 inches of rain a year. So there's lots of opportunity to conserve water. This is one of my early maps where I really wanted to highlight the different edges and things that we have. You can see that this is the different ways I was using the land when I first started, really taking advantage of the shade, you know, on the west end of the property to create more of a forest garden, taking advantage of the southern exposures to create vegetable gardens, and then using the yellow colored areas as a way to diversify in terms of habitat for birds and insects and things like that. We still have quite a bit of lawn area that I haven't actually managed to convert yet, as you can see there, that had green area. But plenty to work with. The paths that you see there have all been developed based on, you know, the areas that we use the most, and that we the ways that we travel naturally and instinctively according to the lay of the land. And you can see we have a lot of steps in here that help us to navigate the slopes. So boundaries are very interesting. We have very distinct boundaries because of the slope of the land, the parking lot to the west of us, and the road to the east. But I thought of boundaries in this case in terms of my own boundaries. I discovered that I'm really a go it alone person, and I discovered doing this course that there is a way that I can work with others, find common interest, and that is a good thing. The smallness of the place and the way that we are hemmed up in has forced me to be more creative and intensive in my approach, and to find ways that seem impossible at the time, you know, like it feels like I've done everything I can do, and then I'll find more ways to do things that increase yield, increase diversity, help me to recycle more. The town of Lee is pretty relaxed, so I haven't had any issues with the town at this point, and both of our neighbors have been incredible to work with. I've been able to blur the boundaries between both of our properties. We've been able to do that together in a way that includes, you know, consensus and conversation and education and all kinds of things. The environmental degradation and the PCB pollution in the river, those are physical and psychic boundaries on a larger scale that we're also learning how to become involved in and to navigate for the first time since we've lived here. Economically, I've found this balance between my coaching and the permaculture work that I'm doing, and my relationships are all very supportive in this work. So that's an incredible boon. Resources. I find that a lot of times what we're thinking about is what we don't have. What I should just say about myself, a lot of times what I'm thinking about is what I don't have and what I still have to do. Looking at the resources that were actually here on site, locally, socially, and personally was an incredible part of this process. And it helped me to relax and slow down and consider things a little bit more fully before jumping to think that I needed something outside of what I have here already. Analysis was also a very interesting process that I was helped along a lot by my mentor, Jane. I've made so many changes to the landscape over the years, but in a very piecemeal way. So for me, the most important thing was to step back and look at the systems and discover what systems were needed most. I used the process of analyzing what was needed through those 3 permaculture principle goals that I chose. And I chose to see them in terms of what are the constraints and what are the opportunities contained on the site. So with the diversity, it's really about, a lot of it was about the opportunity of having lots of microclimates and edges, and finding ways to create more habitat through planting more intensively, planting keystone species, and then adding things like bird houses and mason bee houses and bat houses, increasing the yield. The constraints are the short growing season we have here in the Northeast, the small area that's ideal for gardening, and the opportunities because of the slope for vertical gardening and for creating hoop houses and hoop tunnels. Also replacing some of the unproductive trees and things that we have, trees and bushes, with more productive varieties. That's been a big part of what I saw as needed. With the cycle and recycle, the top thing is water, like really trying to reduce our dependency on town water, trying to enhance the soil makeup because it's very sandy. So increasing the organic matter, but mainly rainwater catchment system, using gravity-fed irrigation, swales, adding barrels, and things like that. So also building guilds was something I felt like that to reduce our reliance on outside compost, and really use the resources we have on hand to increase the nutrient density of the soil. So my first design was increase yield, and I decided to do each of the phases of the design. Each of these designs includes all my implementation designs through 2020 through 2023 and beyond. But they're based on the principles themselves. So with the increased yield, as I was saying, I really wanted to increase yield by replacing like the hedge that was along this west boundary here with things like hazelnut trees. I also introduced bushes along here that support wildlife. We have elderberries and things that go along here, but the main thing was replacing these replacing the hedge here with a productive plant. Along here, we had an old lilac bush. I replaced it with an apple tree. I replaced some of the flowers and things that were growing here with raspberry bushes. And I added aronia bushes and plum trees in this area. There's also these trellises here that I designed into the landscape. And those have really helped increase the growing space that we had available to us, especially for things like squashes and things that require a lot of space if you don't put them up. So the next slide is really about increasing diversity. And with this slide, we wanted to add some of those keystone species I was talking about. So things like oak trees, shingle oak, chinkapin oak, the oaks are trees that support hundreds and hundreds of different varieties of animals and insects and birds, and they're just an incredibly you get a lot of bang for your buck with those trees. So the plan is to add those to our forest canopy as a layer, an upper story layer. We cut down a lot of the Norway maples that were in that area, non-native species that's quite invasive, so that we could make room for those. We also planted goldenrod, another keystone species that supports a lot of pollinators. These were like the two main things, but as you can see, there's a lot of other areas that we planted here, or that we plan to plant, that will also support more, and they'll create more diversity, but also support more diversity. You can, just to say also, these areas along our boundaries with our neighbors means, we can share gooseberries and aronia berries with our neighbor to the south. We can share hazelnuts with our neighbor to the north. And this kind of no man's land between Father Brian's chicken pen and our boundary is becoming a wildlife refuge with, swales and things to catch rainwater, and bushes and trees that provide forage and food and shelter for native species. And then finally, the cycle and recycle design. As I said before, we're really focusing on bettering our water systems, adding water barrels on the north side of the house, where we can't grow anything anyways. It's also a high point. So from there, we can use gravity-fed irrigation, even all the way on this other side of the house, effectively. And then, just expanding the water barrels to include other downspouts, so that we can start to water the drier areas on the south and the east side of the house. And then also there's overflow from all these downspouts, like that we want to redirect effectively. And so we built these swales in different areas to help build up and catch water instead of it just running down the slope. And so these swales are becoming more and more effective in terms of storing rainwater on the site, instead of it sort of running off into the neighbor's yard or into the parking lot below. One of the things that I wanted to point out here that I'm just thinking of now is we've also really increased the ways that we can enjoy the property. And that's like, we have benches here. We have stairs, which are also serve as benches. We have all these little sit spots where we can go out and enjoy the sun or enjoy the shade here in the hammock. Usually it's a 3-season thing that we can do. We also, in terms of the cycle and recycle, we're using worm towers. This is an experiment to see if we can really create an environment where worms want to stay in the garden and not leave and go out there and poop. And so I don't actually have to, have a separate area for vermiculture. We have quite a few of those set up. We have a pee bucket that we're experimenting with. Instead of peeing in the toilet, peeing in the bucket, and then using that to water the garden, diluting it and watering the garden. And then we have a couple of different ways of composting. including this rock pile over here. This is, again, this no man's land between Father Brian's yard and our yard. And this is one of the social system things that we've done is we've talked to him about having a place where we can throw some of the plant material that we can't mulch directly on our site, and creating a kind of a rot pile here that's made to look a little more aesthetically pleasing through this wattle fence that we built here. And so that's been an interesting collaboration between us and Father Brian. So these are my implementation phases. I've chosen to talk about these in terms of the months that they happen and then the zones where each thing happens. That's helped me to get really clear and precise about where and when these different implementations are going to happen. 2020, 2021, and 2022. And these include a lot of the other things that, you know, besides the main design elements that I wanted to include in each of those permaculture principles, these include other elements as well. And then 2023 and beyond. These are the zones and what they look like now. As you can see, we've really increased the number of areas where we can hang out and where other people can hang out. And we've gotten rid of all the lawn. So none of the lawn exists anymore. And we have one addition to our other zones in the community garden, which I'll talk about more now in the social systems design soon. This is our maintenance plan, and I've chosen to put the maintenance plan in differently than the implementation plan in terms of each element in the design. Like, what does each element involve? You know, what are the dollars per year to do it? What is the time based on experience, and also what I anticipate that it takes for me to support all of these different things. And then the social systems. So one of the really added benefits of having done this course and engaged in it actively, you know, and on this site, I'm really glad I started with our own place, is how that's enhanced my relationships with the neighbors. I saw it in the end, you know, when I really had to write about it, I see it as building social capital and doing this through inclusion, through coming to a consensus together, and through sharing yields. So I just see Wayward Farm as one of the nodes in a network that's spreading the word about permaculture and about turning lawns into food for people and pollinators. Since most of my work is all done online, and since I'm a very successful introvert, I didn't really have many connections around the town. So an unexpected bonus has been my relationship with my neighbors. To the north, Father Brian McGrath, he resides at St. Mary's Rectory. He has chickens, and we've shared a lot about our experience raising these chickens. He has a lot more experience than I do, so he's been really supportive in that way. He was instrumental in helping me come to the conclusion it would be a good idea to remove that boundary hedge and plant the hazelnut shrubs. We talked about the benefits of composting our excess prunings and the rot pile. And we also discussed more productive ways of him using his lawn. Facing High Street, he's planted fruit trees there now. And based on all of this, he invited me to help him design and manage a community garden in a piece of lawn between two parking lots right behind the church, which is basically, I can see from here, it's in our backyard. So I decided to do that with him, ideally because I realized this is a perfect project for these social systems certification that I'm looking for here. This has led me to being much more involved, as you can imagine. Locally, I've been meeting and working with dozens of people that I never would have otherwise. We now have a Lee Community Gardens website. It's a local organization. We have fiscal sponsorship through another local nonprofit called Greenagers. The town of Lee, I now belong to an environmental committee called the Lee Greener Gateway Committee. The town administration helped me get the grant that I needed in order to expand on the garden and start a new garden. The volunteers, local volunteers have stepped forward. They have helped with every aspect of creating all of this. There's a college internship program. It's a local branch of this nationwide school for kids with Asperger's, and they have helped, it has helped them find ways to perform community service by helping with the harvest and distributing the harvest. And this year we're going to create some internships also for them to participate even more in depth. The Berkshire Housing has approved distributions for senior and low-income housing buildings here in town, just a block away from this garden. So, and yes, the library has asked, for a display about pollinators for this May, and I'm going to be teaching some classes there as well. So much more dynamic and rich relationship between me and the community, and providing a service, a way for the community to engage and give back to other residents in multiple ways. To the south of me, our neighbor who moved in 2019, we've been sharing yields. He's been inspired to start his own vegetable garden, and been teaching him about pollinators and about invasives. And we planted the verge in front of his house and made it into a pollinator path together. And then passersby, we just live right in an area where a lot of people walk their dogs, just take walks for fun. And I put up signage and things so that people can start to understand why we don't have a tidy little garden, like most people do, with hedges and, neatly mown and all of that. So as a result, we've had a lot of spontaneous conversations and garden tours with people that I had never met before. My plan for the future is to enlist the help of a friend who's a graphic artist, create a little map and brochure so that I can do more formal tours over the next year, like at least one a month, where, I take people around the garden and really answer their questions and see what they're interested in and how I can support them. This is a little map that shows where I am here with a red triangle. This is where the community garden is. And this is where our future garden will be, next to another low-income housing unit. And these are the areas where the distribution of the harvest happens, these fuchsia boxes. This is the college internship program location right downtown, so it's very easy for them to walk to the garden to help out. And this is where the town administration is, which has become a very youthful advocate. And one thing I didn't put on here actually is that the library, also where I'll be teaching classes, is right here, just on the same block where I live. So all in all, I feel like the overarching theme of this journey with the Permaculture Women's Guild, the certification program, has been slow down, Catherine, take time to observe, take time to question, to consider the outcomes from multiple perspectives, and include others in the process. This is something that I never really slowed down to do. And, it takes a little bit more time when you're working with other people to do things, but it's the potential and the possibilities are exponential when I do that. So I feel like that's been the main takeaway. I've really come to deeply appreciate the observation component of Goberdeam and Goberdeam itself. But the observation point, as much as I've come from a background of meditation, the way that I guide and mentor women is all about pausing, taking a moment, stopping to consider. And yet this really was the hardest step for me. It's the one I come back to every day. It's become a respite and a sanctuary from the doing part of my day, and something that has deepened in my experience. This has been a really inspiring course to be a part of. It's being created by and for women. I have special insight into that, I think, because I started with the Cornell permaculture course, which is excellent, nothing wrong with it at all. But the aesthetics of that course and the feel of that course, it was not on a par at all with this course. I just found this much more beautiful to work with. And I love the diversity of the points of view, the diversity of the perspectives, the way that different women have insight into the permaculture principles and how they use them. And it really opened my mind and expanded my vision in a big way. And having a mentor was wonderful. I really feel like I would have felt much more isolated, even with the forums. It's not really my preferred way to communicate with people. So having that one-on-one and having the group sessions that she led was very, very helpful to me and gave me a lot of confidence. And as a result, I feel like I can go into this year with the intention to build a business out of this and practice what I've learned and build on that in real life, in real time, and really contribute a lot more to the community at large. So I want to thank Heather and everybody who has put their love and passion into this course. I'm so grateful that it's here and that I found it and that I had the time and space and energy and support to do it. So thank you so much.